Welcome to the Skiffy and Fantasy Show's Reading Rangers!
Who's to say why we see what we see? Or why some shadows are just a wheezing sound around a corner, and others are furious vermin? Why sometimes they appear as the faintest of shivers, and other times they bury deep in our guts?
I think that's about the U.S. beating Pakistan at cricket. Is that not what that quote is about?
It's applicable to that, probably.
Okay.
But it did not originate with cricket, to my knowledge.
No, it probably did not. I'm Shaun.
I'm Daniel.
And on today's show, we'll discuss Woodworm by Layla Martinez. It is translated for 2 lines press by Sophie Hughes and Annie McDermott. It is a very interesting book.
It is, and it has insects, though not crickets or insect-like things. But before we get into that discussion, a reminder to please share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfantasy.com listener suggestions. Some of those questions or comments could get discussed right here on future shows. And if you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams to be a part of our interactive live streaming format. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord. It only takes $1 a month.
Only $1. Or your first barn. Whichever. Whichever's worth more, basically.
Which you value least or which you value most?
Oh, well, based on this story, that could go either way, depending on which family you're in.
This is true.
Interesting. Well, okay, so we got this book. This is Daniel's fault.
Yes, and
you have a physical copy. I probably have one, but I accidentally packed it.
Either that or we were originally supposed to do this podcast earlier.
We were.
And we might have had to get you an electronic because of timing, and then we ended up having time. But yeah, here's the cover.
I'm pretty sure I have it.
But...
It's just now in a box.
Yeah, all right.
But this is kind of your fault, Daniel, because we covered a collection of short fiction, Latin American short fiction, that was horror broadly defined, because some of it was a little weird. And I guess you and this publisher are now best friends, because it doesn't seem that hard for them to just send us a book to cover on this show now.
Oh, yes. So I've done plenty of other stuff from them for Rachel Cordesco's speculative fiction and translation.
Yeah.
And was familiar with them. And so, yeah, our last Reading Rangers was on a collection. And then I saw this one, and it was interesting to me when I read the summary, because it's Gothic fiction, and Gothic fiction is far and away like my most favorite thing. And so I jumped on it immediately and was like, well, we did the last one. Maybe this would be interesting to do in a future one as well. Not realizing that it would be like the very next one that we did. But
so what is Woodworm about? Because that has been the task written in the script that you wrote for yourself to tell us about. And so I suppose you could give us like a kind of rundown. What is this book?
Yeah. So it's set in a haunted sort of house in Spain, in the La Mancha region of Spain, if I recall correctly. And it follows, the story kind of centers around 4 generations of women that have lived in this house. A great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, and daughter is how effectively one has to refer to them as, because they don't get names.
Right.
We'll talk hopefully a little bit about why that may be. But the majority of the book focuses on the grandmother and the granddaughter, the granddaughter, yeah, sorry, or daughter, depending how you view the timelines. So the grandmother and her granddaughter are currently living in the house at the main time period that the novel is set. And again, this house is haunted. It's haunted by ghosts of the dead from the surrounding village, also people that are part of their family. And it's also haunted not just by ghosts, but also by visions of saints and by angels. And these angels are not how you typically think of angels. They're more like Gregor Samsa, like insectoid type, mantid type creatures that prowl on the roof and make scary sounds, and they have to get chased away by the saints. And so you're dropped in this story right away with the idea that this house is haunted and these sorts of general forces are involved and weird things go on. And then you get clues that something has happened to the granddaughter's life, where she has just come from serving some time in courts and in prison. And the house is surrounded by journalists who want to, get the scoop from her now having come back home. And that somehow this history involves a boy who has gone missing. And this boy who has gone missing is the child of a rich family that these generations of women have a long and storied history of involvement with. The rich family that's involved in winemaking in the region, in the village. And so they've all kind of served that family, each generation, in one way or another. And so as the novel progresses, you begin to, it's structured contrapuntally between either from the point of view of the grandmother and the granddaughter. And it kind of slowly goes back in time to reveal the history of what has actually happened and how that relates to what is going on when you first enter into things in terms of the ghosts, the hauntings, and that missing boy. So anything that I... important tidbit that...
Well, I mean, there's like details I suppose you could have missed, but like, I don't need you to give the whole thing.
No.
I think it's worth
we don't want to like spoil everything either.
Well, you can't. You should read the book. But I think that there's some things that are worth talking about in a little bit more depth that I know are in some of your notes. Like some of the setting, for example, I think is really important because part of this book essentially takes place during the Spanish Civil War, which I suspect most Americans don't really know a lot about anymore. I mean, a company in chat at the moment may know, because knowing Paul, he probably has read 10 books on it. But no,
myself, I know very little of that history.
Franco regime, because Franco wins that war, and you get a nationalist government in France, and it rules until 1975 or something, if I remember.
Yeah, mid-late 70s, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's worth pointing out that there are some connections to American literature with the Franco regime, because probably most famously, Ernest Hemingway was a journalist in Spain during the Civil War, covering the war, and so there were, of course, some Americans that sort of went over, like joined, but that's a whole other monstrosity. But
honestly, most of what I know of it is from seeing sort of the after effects and the influence that it had on Pedro Almodovar and his films, particularly his early films, of kind of Spain leaving that oppressive regime and time period, and the actual historical details of what that Civil War was and how it affected people. Very little.
Well, and it's interesting to think about because this book, at its core, is a story of generational trauma. So it's a book about all of the different ways that the choices we've made in the past affect successive generations, whether that's their fault or not. And we can take that literally in the sense that things follow families around, the crimes and the kinds of attitudes and things that they've engaged in kind of follow. But you could also think of that metaphorically as in like the ghosts of our past, because to some degree that also is true here. And that is not dissimilar from something like a civil war, which has generational impacts. And in the case of this civil war, a very notable one, because it leads to a nationalist fascist government, which has very serious impacts and is interesting to see, because we often don't get Spanish language literature discussed on this show or in SF circles from Spain itself. It's typically from Central and Latin America. or Central and South America, I should say. And so I thought that was really interesting that those two things are kind of going crisscross from each other to some degree, and I appreciate that, the importance of that backdrop, because even today, I mean, the issue of like the region of the Catalan region in Spain, not that many years ago, there were conflicts occurring in that region in Spain over its self-governance and other things, and I won't pretend to fully understand that situation. But that's all, I would argue, leading back to this very thing. So that continued reverberation of history is like the reverberations in our family history.
And had profound cultural implications and social implications that this novel kind of gets into, I think, in some ways, at least from how I'm reading it. But before we get into that, I have a question for you.
No.
Oh, okay. Can I ask myself?
Yeah, what's your question?
Daniel. Was this what you expected it to be?
I actually came in completely
going
cold.
into it.
Okay. All I knew was that it was in translation and it was horror. That's it.
Okay. So did that meet your expectations?
I'll say this. The thing it made me feel at the very beginning was I really, one of these days, want to have someone on the show who can read the original Spanish, who is a native speaker, I should specify, who can read both, right? Because I think it would be really interesting to talk about translation and how we take something in Spanish and move it into English, and what is being kept stylistically from the Spanish and what's being lost. Because something about the very beginning of this made me feel like it wasn't quite stream of consciousness, although there are moments when it kind of leads into that, but it feels incredibly angry at the beginning. Very stiff prose, very punchy, I would say. And I don't know how much of that is the language, right? That this is being translated into English and maybe some of those flourishes are not translatable, or that is how it was written. And later on, I think it actually changes a little bit. It's still punchy, but I feel like the punchiness shifts as we go further back in time. It doesn't, but I don't know. There's something there about
there's something there stylistically, and I don't know for certain because I don't speak Spanish, and I certainly not native, but also even amateur, non-native. And so I don't know if it's in the original, but it stylistically fits as, like you were saying, punchy. To me, it was more like a gnawing.
Yeah, that's a better
Like
phrasing.
gnawing, like almost like the I'm going to keep wanting to say wormwood, the woodworm, the woodworm gnawing, like the rot, like that kind of thing that's going on. But so yeah, that would definitely be interesting. But going back to the question, I related to how I felt, I was expecting there to be more horror here than there was. There's definitely, it's horror, but to me, it was almost more just like a dark magical realism.
It's more gothic than true horror.
More gothic, than true horror. So that I didn't realize quite how heavily it was in the gothic side as opposed to the horror gothic, I guess I would say. It's almost like I think I put in my notes, like Shirley Jackson meets Edgar Allan Poe, with a bit of other stuff thrown in there, I guess. But definitely in that gothic vein. But I was also, I guess I was surprised by just how much the style of it, as you said, but also the structure, the voices of the grandmother and the mother, the unnamed characters. There was just a lot that surprised me in this, I guess, overall, which is a good thing, I think. But I expected a haunted house kind of novel.
Which it is.
And it is, but it's a really unique take on that. It's not as classical haunted house as I expected it to be, I guess I would say.
Gosh, I really wish we should have invited Silvia Moreno Garcia here, because I would really love her perspective on this, because she's done.
Did she blurb this, or?
I don't recall.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, but it is very interesting because I think that you're right that it is horror, but it is horror that when we think of really the Gothic novel in particular, where it is more about the tone and the feeling than it is about the idea of terror, right? Fear may be an emotion that's felt throughout this work, but it's not necessarily our fear. It is often the fear of the characters, the fear of the things that are happening around them. And then the supernatural kind of exists and manipulates and plays around and occasionally does horrific things. But then that horror that it does present is a kind of almost... It's weird to say, but when you think about what a lot of very popular horror works contain, it feels mundane. And I don't mean that as an insult. Yeah. I mean that as that's actually kind of unsettling because, like, for example, it's the granddaughter, if I'm correct, who is occasionally spoken to by the saints and is like given glimpses of the future. But not all of those glimpses
the grandmother. They
both do, don't they? Because later in the novel, she gets them too,
well,
right?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And the grandmother's, I think, upset. Well, it depends which grandmother we mean, because it's multiple layers.
Exactly.
Right, but like, not every vision that she gets is a nice one. Some of them are like, you'll get, I mean, I guess it can be fearful and terrifying. You're going to get pregnant, like you're going to marry this dude, which is maybe a little scary for a young person. But then sometimes they're like, yeah, something horrible is going to happen to somebody. They're going to die. And there's nothing you can do about it, which has a different level of terror. Like when the one character's husband like withers away and dies in bed. And she knows the whole time he's going to die, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And the story doesn't linger on it that much. It's more to kind of point out that she's given this vision, and despite that, she makes these efforts to try to save his life, and it's ultimately unsuccessful. And that sort of... there isn't like a slasher hiding in the dark. There's not a monster there to take him away. It's more like the supernatural feeds into the sort of dark aspects of our lives. Yeah. And that's, to me, feels much more like the Gothic, a version of the Gothic, or what we might think of as the Gothic. Although there's not a lot of monasteries, convents, or crypts. So,
correct. Yeah.
They're not.
The setting is not as.
I don't think so. I mean, they may mention there may
Well, I mean, there's the wardrobe, the wall.
Yeah. Well, there is that. That could be. Yeah. And to be fair, the house is also a burial ground because one of the male figures is like buried in the wall while he's hiding from the Civil War because he doesn't want to get conscripted. And he's. I mean,
you're exactly right. I think the characters here, all these generations of women, they become habituated to it, to these ghosts, to these terrors, and that it's not a horror for them at all. It's just life. It's mundane. Like you walk into the room and there's some weird legs of something sticking out from under the bed again. Oh, the doors are slamming shut. There's this sound coming from behind the brick wall from the person that's buried or sealed behind the wall, Poe style, and they're used to it, and what gives them terror and the fear comes all from the traumas of the past. They've gone through such trauma. What is there to fear about a ghost walking into the room or sticking out from under the bed or surprising them? Like, that doesn't shock them at all anymore.
In fact, it happens.
You're right. It's other way worse things have happened. So.
I mean, I love that you bring that up because there's a moment when one of I can't remember which character, mentions that occasionally the shadows, which is like the ghosts that live in the house, would beckon her in underneath like the bed or into a dark room, and then she'd like come out with bruises and cuts and stuff because they like beat her up or whatever. And it's interesting that she mentions it, and it's like a couple of lines, and then
that's it.
That's it. And it's like, well, isn't it weird that is considered far less traumatic than the way, for example, the Harabos treat the family? who, because they're rich and wealthy, and so how the wealthy treat the poor in this context seems to me much more horrific and is dwelled on a lot more, because I suppose to some degree the shadows beating you up is like a single one-time event that maybe you stop falling for after a while and you can kind of appease them, but like you can't appease these wealthy parasites who will do horrible things to you behind your back or to your face,
and suck the life from you. Yeah,
literally. Yeah, they're like the ticks, basically.
Yes, yeah. Or the woodworms, and those are or the woodworms, I guess. And so that, I mean, you mentioned before, this is what did you say it was? Class conflict.
Absolutely,
sort of the main
class
gist
conflict.
Of this, right?
Yeah.
It's also, though, a story about revenge, right?
Yes.
And so all these horrors that briefly get mentioned in terms of happening to the characters in the house, in a way that they can't do anything about. That is just the way life is. But they revolt. What they revolt against and are fighting against is that all these ghosts, all these things in their house are in there for the same bloody reason as they're suffering. And that's because of the rich. Yeah. And so that's going to be the source of their revenge, because they have the ability to do that, unlike all these ghosts that are trapped in the house.
And not just the rich, the people that sort of help prop up power.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there's an interesting point to be made, like in the very opening chapter, when she's saying, look at how everybody will, like, when the journalists show up, like how immediately so many of them lie through their teeth just to get their 5 minutes of fame, right? Look, we all knew that they were bad from the beginning. We all knew there was something up. And that sort of establishes this very clear sense that, like, some people know that they're being trodden on by other people, and they don't want to sort of contribute to that, and others like have illusions that if they just play the game, it will allow them to move up that ladder.
Right.
And this is part of that game, is like finding other people to step on. That happens with one of the father figures, who is a pimp, right, who runs basically a brothel, and he has power. He'll never become the ultra wealthy, but he is still
grandfather, basically the patriarch of this whole family. Yeah. And
all he's ultimately doing is stepping on those that are beneath him. And it's this like endless cycle of stepping on people below you. And I mean, the revenge is very much about like the core, the root of that, which is, of course, these very wealthy, like aristocratic people who view everyone else as disgusting. One of the characters literally says at one point that that's the moment I realized they viewed us all as disgusting, as beneath their contempt, all of these kinds of things, right? They're the ultimate source, but like that rot like feeds through all of society in this book.
Correct.
Such that you're not actually fully safe and you can't even find solidarity, because that's how much it's seeped into the culture.
Exactly. Like you have the villagers, like the guy from the village that comes to the house because the grandmother has a reputation in this town or village, whatever you want to call it, as being a kind of witch figure, a folk healer in a way, that she has mysterious powers to both curse and also to potentially heal. And so one of the characters from the village comes to the house kind of begging for, I don't even remember what the circumstances are, but basically begging for her aid. And she's like, where were you when we were being, stamped upon and beaten and attacked by others, from the journalists to this wealthy family in town? You just constantly, are looking after yourself and wanting to appear good in the eyes of those with power. And there's a line, I wish I had written it down, but something like, you think that just because somebody's going to pat you on the head and tell you good job done, that's going to make you rise in society rather than being just the dog you are. Yeah. This idea that even some of those, as you said, that rot spreads down to the lower castes or the lower class.
Yeah.
And they turn on each other in the hopes that they'll be able to rise in society when really they never will, because they're seen as vermin.
Yeah, there's an implication in the story too that that the poor and the downtrodden like were represented in one of the sides of the Civil War, and that they just basically got beat and they lost. I don't know if that's I don't know enough about the Civil War to know if that's accurate to what happened or if that's just like an interpolation. But I thought that was really interesting that
or a regional aspect,
or maybe a regional aspect.
It may be that like in that particular region, the Republicans, I believe they were, that were in that kind of got defeated by Franco's forces, the more conservative side of things.
Yeah, like I suppose if it
that
was...
they may have been the more rural kind of like people in power. I don't know.
I'm trying to think, like, was the Republican or Loyalist faction, were they then more democratic? And is that what this is going for? Is like the idea that the people have a voice in power, because in a fascist regime they really don't? Or was it a leftist government? I don't know. I don't know.
I thought they were more leftist, but there's something there. I just don't have enough of the cultural or historical knowledge.
Yeah, I don't either.
Paul now?
Well, this would be a thing where I feel like this is a novel that really opens itself to a sort of historical interpretation of the work, because there's a lot in here.
And analysis. There's a lot of interpretation in general, I would say. I mean, the last 2 paragraphs of this novel, I won't really talk about them per se, but they're hugely impactful. It's like it ends with a bang or reveal. And there's lots of ways to interpret things. There's lots of ways to interpret what went on in the past and how that relates to the overall themes of the novel in terms of revenge, class struggle, gender struggles. And I don't know if there's one answer. There could be many. And I think it probably is a novel where you have to read multiple times to get a sense of things, particularly in that not everything's revealed to the end that has implications on what was going on previously. Particularly with those unnamed characters, it's very easy to conflate or confuse what's happening to whom during different sections. That second reading, I think, would help in that.
Yeah, I agree with you that this is a work that would benefit from, not just like multiple readings, but having different perspectives read it. Because I feel like, you can't probably contain within you all the different ways to interpret this work, because it's just not possible. But having this would be great for like a book club of people with a variety of different knowledge, because it would allow us to tease out more than we can really do in a podcast with 2 people on it. Some of the elements of this book that are perhaps beyond our knowledge points, like the Civil War, is something we have some vague understanding of, but we don't understand it fully. And I think there's more here that we don't really have on hand.
Right. And I mean, we should point out at some point here, too, we're talking about a novel that's about female revenge, and here we are, 2 guys talking about this.
That is accurate.
Where it's like, I think that... like, I can have a perspective, we can have a perspective from this, but we're going to have a male perspective from it.
We're
not going to read
outside.
Things, right? We're reading it from the outside, And so I think that in that vein of sort of book club discussion, having it between multiple sexes, multiple genders would be interesting.
I think this book would benefit from that. We can talk a lot about this book's interest in I don't even know I would say it's interested in gender per se, although that's certainly here. It's definitely interested in like the position
sexual
and roles
politics.
of women and sexual politics. Yeah, I would agree. It is a book
and sexual conflict.
Definitely sexual conflict. There's an issue here throughout of who do the main character women marry? Who do they have children with? Right? What is the context in which those take place?
What choice do they have in it?
What choice do they actually have in some of those decisions, right? I mean, there's multiple times when one of the daughters even says, like, I married this guy. It wasn't that I loved him. He just wasn't a piece of garbage, basically. And like, I love there's a line, I think it's the granddaughter. I can't remember, where she says, like, yeah, so like my husband he was nice and kind. We didn't love each other, but he didn't talk very much, but like, he didn't hit me. He didn't do anything bad to me. He was, and like, maybe that was just enough, like, and I'm like, yes. But that says so much in those lines about what the expectations of men are at this point in time and in this culture, that a good man is not even necessarily a man that you adore or love that much. Love is not part of the equation. A good man is like a person who doesn't make your life actively worse. Yeah. Right. He doesn't contribute necessarily. He just doesn't make it worse. He's not actively
trying to hurt you every moment. Yeah.
Whereas other men, right, do, right? The great-grandfather is an abusive, horrible man. Yeah. Yeah.
In every regard. Physically, emotionally, mentally, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to say the granddaughter, I think it's the or maybe the great-granddaughter, who marries she's like, one of the Harabos family is like after her, and then she marries... They keep describing him as kind of dopey, but this guy who she has a kid with, but she messes around with other kids, so there's the other guys. So there's like an element there of, well, not all of the women are necessarily good either, in some respect.
Well, the granddaughter in the current time frame, in terms of the book being mostly about the grandmother and the granddaughter's mother sort of was more rebellious and wild, you get the sense. Yes. And she disappeared, she vanished, she was taken, which is a traumatic event that the book deals with as well. And so this was right after the granddaughter was born.
Yeah, it's the mother. Yeah. It's the mother is who I'm talking about. The mother, because there's the two men, right? There's the man she's married to who becomes a bit stalkery and a bit jealous, but she's also messing with this Harabos boy, man who's like the estate holder, and the grandmother, I think, says basically at that point it kind of doesn't matter who took her. Both of them played their part in her eventual disappearance. Yeah, correct. Yeah, which is a horrifying thing to think that that's the thing that you've now come to, is you don't think you're going to know the real answer of what happened. Right. Yeah. Which unfortunately is true throughout this book. There are multiple references to people disappearing. We know what happened to them, but we don't really know. Like people that were, taken, but one family snitches and like people are taken and then they just disappear forever. We know what happened to them, but we don't know the specific details.
Which I'm sure is linked to the political history as well.
Absolutely.
That's present here, but you can have guesses based on who appears as ghosts and some lines that are here and there subtly put in, but I don't know as there's definitive answers often.
But that's also part of the tone of the work. It's not a work that's always going to give you the like straight-laced answer to these things. Right. Yeah.
So we've been talking a few times and danced around this idea of the confusion of talking about the characters, because they are all, daughters and mothers, right? Yeah. And so between these different generations, they don't get names. Yeah. Do you have any take on that?
I hadn't really thought about it. I suppose the only thing I would take is that as a generational story, the relationship of each character to the generation before them tells us enough that their names are not strictly as necessary. You could also possibly read this as by having a character nameless, it allows more individuals to insert themselves into that character, because this could be you. We probably can't, but for reasons that I think you've already stated. But you will see that sometimes in stories where by not having a character name, it makes it easier for the reader to insert themselves into the story. But that's kind of the extent of what do you think about why do you think the namelessness matters?
I had two kinds of thought, and I hadn't really thought of that, but I'd agree with what you said too. One was that even though each generation is distinct, they also share so much in common to what happened to them that the trauma is interchangeable.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, they've each lived the exact same life. Different things, different details have happened, but they've, by the same generalities of society and the specific relations that they've had within this village between the different families and the townspeople, it's the same story. And so there's an interchangeability of them. So I had that thought. The other, I don't know if this is 100% true or not, but I kind of get the sense that the only characters we get names of are from the Harobos. That's how it's pronounced?
No, it's
family.
Not just from them, but it's almost entirely them and people that in some way are associated with them.
Right.
Because we get Maria and Carmen, who both work for the Harobos. Oh, that's right.
Work for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, obviously there's a bunch of men who like work for them who have names sometimes.
Right. A lot of the men, well, some of the men get names.
But we don't get a lot.
I was kind of thinking that
a
lot of the people from the sort of the poor lower class don't get names. Whereas most of those from the higher class and those in power, as you said, associated with them most directly, do get the names. But I don't know if that's 100% true, but it's another kind of thought that I had.
That might be a thing to look at, because if it is the case, then it's fairly clear that the novel is really wanting us to focus on the spheres of power, even more than just the fact that obviously they're the sort of villains of the story, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to also think about their influence outside of that, which would be a thing we talk about with the wealthy, and which many different segments of this book imply anyway, which is that this family has an enormous amount of influence, and how they view the people that work for them has a huge impact on the way they talk about that influence. Like there's the moment when the mother granddaughter's husband dies horribly in his bed, and the Harabos family like stands there and goes, "Oh, we like loved him so much, and like wasn't he so great?" And they're like, "Well, but wait, hold on. While he was dying and we were trying to scrape together every dime we could to get him treatment from doctors who are questionable, you're sitting there with all this money. You could have, he worked for you for all these years as your foreman. Where were you?" And of course, one of the characters says this, and then that goes through the rumor mill.
Doesn't go well.
It does not go well. They hate her after that because she was honest. And it's like, well, but wait a minute. She's completely right. If you really cared about this guy, you would have found out he was sick, and you would have said, "You know what? We have more than enough. We're going to push our weight because we want to see if we can help this guy." But they don't, because he is just a cog to them. He is, even in death, he's only a thing that is useful. Right? They don't view him as a person.
Correct. Yeah. And they're villainous in that regard, but they're not as evil as, say, like the great-grandfather to me. Like, he is just pure... He's very villainous, nasty, terrible. A lot of the Harabos family, they are in some ways victims of their own entitlement, in the sense that they don't realize that they're being terrible. They're just so used to it, right? They live
I don't agree.
in this. They live in that power. They don't care. But it's like many of those in society today in power, I would argue, that are used to it, and just it doesn't even dawn on them that there's something wrong. And if somebody says something, or they're in denial about it, because if somebody does speak the honest truth to them, they react with, "Well, I'm not a racist," or something along those lines. It seemed very familiar to me in terms of that, of much of society today.
There's certainly some...
And to me, that wouldn't necessarily be pure villainy. It's wrong, it might be reprehensible, but it's not villainy on the same regard as like the great-grandfather was to me.
I would argue they're worse. Because, so the reason I say that is the worst villains are the villains that pretend that they're not wolves in sheep's clothing, right? The great-grandfather, there's really no illusion. Even one of the I think it's the granddaughter, like, basically says he's the type of man that the people like the Harabos would use when it is necessary, when they need someone to crack down on the masses. They'll use him because he's violent, he's aggressive, right? He's a tool for them. So to some degree, they actually do know exactly what kind of people they are. But then the worst part is that they preside over an enormous amount of misery. They must know that misery exists, and yet they think that what they're doing by giving jobs, by existing in high society is good fundamentally. And to some degree, that's even worse, because I don't think that the great-grandfather would argue that he was a good man. He was exactly what he was, and he knew what he was, and he knew exactly what he was doing, and there were no illusions for him. But for them, they try to pass off that they're not what they really are. And that is actually more insidious, because then it's harder to convince them that what they're doing is harmful.
Is correct. Yes.
Yeah. They think we gave her a job, and so what? She couldn't afford to live and she's homeless and she's dying now. Well, I mean, we were doing the right thing. And it's like, but you could have afforded more, right? You could have done more for them to actually have had a meaningful impact on their lives. Right. The fact that they used the foreman on his death as a thing to try to prop themselves up as, look how virtuous we are. And we know exactly that they're not. That if they were virtuous, he never would have wanted for medical care. Right. He was a foreman, for fuck's sake. It's not like he was, like the first level of employee. He had some degree of authority. He was managing their vineyard. And yet they treat him like, both in life and death, as a tool, as an object for their own value. And that, I think, is more insidious, because you just can't, they will not see that they dehumanize. The great-grandfather knows. He knows he's treating women like sex objects. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's perhaps psychopathic.
He just doesn't care.
He just doesn't care. Yeah.
Right.
They pretend like they do. And yeah.
Well, I think some of them know, they just pretend like they don't know.
Well,
but I'm thinking particularly of because it's a subtle difference, perhaps. I agree with what you're saying. That's what maybe most of the family is, but the one I was thinking of in particular, maybe I read it wrong, but the father of the young boy, he almost seems like he's the one member of that family that wants to do good and thinks he's really doing good. He's just utterly oblivious and not intelligent enough to realize that what he and his family are doing is oppressive.
Yeah.
And at least when I read it, I felt some sympathy for him from that revenge standpoint, because he, as opposed to the other elder members of that family, who very well probably did know what they were doing, he was oblivious to it. At least that's how I kind of saw it. To me, that garnered some sympathy. But.
Well, I mean, maybe we could be a little bit fair here. We're talking in broad strokes, so we could certainly make exceptions, right? That there are individual characters that maybe don't fit that mold. And perhaps in this case, that is one, that someone gets sucked into a world that they don't realize is as exploitative and as violent and aggressive as it actually is. And perhaps in that makes him maybe an unintended villain. He doesn't mean to be the villain. He doesn't know that he is the villain. But actions that he's done that he doesn't fully understand the ramifications of are causing villainous impacts. Or to some degree, his family has done those things, and he has now inherited all of that in the same way that
right. the women have inherited the damage from their family.
And so then the question now has to be, like, is the revenge necessary or justified to be perpetrated against each successive generation?
Well, along with that, the revenge is not there's not an absence of collateral damage, because the novel makes clear, I think, that the damage to each generation of women in this family is self-inflicted as well as inflicted from the outside forces and what has happened in the past. The need for revenge, they're hurting their offspring in that need for revenge as well, to some degree.
Yeah, this kind of gets to like narratives we sometimes hear about, the poor, that they make bad decisions and those have consequences. And while it is perhaps technically true, you end up in this spot where, like, when you are downtrodden, like, to expect rational decisions doesn't always make sense.
Right, isn't going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas, like, there is something about the idea that people in positions of power who have all of the privilege and entitlement, that they could actually think about the consequences of their actions because they have nothing better to do except to do that. And yet they don't. There's sometimes why we like think of the poor when they make bad decisions. We just say that's a consequence of their conditions. Whereas when a wealthy person makes a bad decision, we might say the same thing, but we sort of also recognize that, but he should have known better, or they should have known better. And so like these women who have been downtrodden or poor, people don't like them, they're pariahs in their communities. They're making decisions that are going to have consequences for their family down the line. But to some degree, like, they become deeply sympathetic as a consequence, precisely because of what they've gone through that has led to these decisions. And the idea that, justice is not being served in their society, so they're taking it upon themselves to do so, because basically nobody is held accountable by any kind of legal system insofar as that exists here, which is, unfortunate. But that is sometimes how people react. I mean, this is why, like, when people talk about, like, oh, the revolution, like when the poor rise up. Well, what do you expect is going to happen in that context? Because, like, when people riot or rise up, it's not like they have a concrete plan. Like, they didn't, like, write a 85-page treatise on, like, what was going to happen. They're reacting emotionally, as almost every member of this family does, right? And those emotional reactions, some of them are certainly very justified, and some of them maybe get morally gray, but they're understandable, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Curse your enemies and all of their children. Do it.
It goes along, too, with this idea of them all being trapped.
Yeah. In the house, literally, and not.
They're trapped literally in the house. They're trapped literally in this situation, and they're trapped into actions that only make them further entrapped.
Yeah.
It's this self-perpetuating kind of thing, which, of course, is what society does, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what are they supposed to do?
But in that, they're able to take some power to force the revenge, which otherwise would not have happened.
Yeah, and it's the only power they really have, right? I mean, there are multiple generations that mention, like, I can't afford college. So what is left for them? They live in a rural town. There's no money. I mean, they're trapped literally. They fundamentally can't escape. There's no financial escape for them. And so they're forced to either work for these wealthy families who are going to treat them like garbage, or not work for them, and just every day is like basically going in the garden and finding random bits of food. Like, it's a really horrific situation to find yourself in. And then you're trapped in a house with a bunch of, like, shadows and, like, insectoid, like, angel monsters and all kinds of, like, those kinds of things. So it's these layers and layers of like hopelessness,
right?
But it makes sense why the daughter at one point, right, is like the mother figure, depending on your perspective, right? She is rebellious, and she's like going out with these boys at night and all of these things. It's like, well, but part of the reason she's doing that is she's getting a release. She's getting to, like, throw all of her emotions out the door and have an escape. And it's maybe not a smart one, a choice, but it is what is her future? What other option does she have?
What else can she do with agency? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, leading a Harabos kid along and
with her own control,
having him chase her around, and she never gives in to him. Like, that is some measure of control that she can give. Yeah. The guy who stalks
as
her,
dangerous it becomes. Yeah.
Yeah. As dangerous it becomes. Right.
And the same with the other daughter. I mean, right? The youngest daughter in this, that's ultimately what is leading to the main sort of plot thread of the book, is her wanting to have choice over actions and some sort of control in this life that she feels trapped in. She tried to get away, to go to university, and did, but ends up getting drawn back. So she went to Madrid, right? If I remember correctly, but still has to come back now. And she's humiliated having to go work for the Hirabos family. And what's interesting is the grandmother actually kind of like looks down on her for doing that and gets angry with her. But it's at the same time, it's like anger at yourself because you did the same thing, right? You're frustrated because you were left in the same situation of not having a choice.
Yeah.
And did things to try to have choices and things that might or may not have been good, and now this fourth generation is effectively doing the same, just in her own way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is a very deep novel. It's a weird way to phrase it that way.
No, it's like 150 pages, roughly. There's a lot in
There's a lot in here. It's part of it is like the way that the POVs are written. It's all internal, and
right.
Things are sort of tossed out, like almost as though a character is literally telling the story to us. It'd be kind of fun to have this in audiobook with 4 different characters with very different tones of voice, which could be
talking
kind of fun.
to you.
Yeah.
Right.
But they have to get like a family of like actresses that are actually at the different age groups. That's what I want.
The 4 generations.
Like a Douglas family. I want a Douglas family of women.
There's there's the extra sort of kink thrown in too, in terms of are they both unreliable narrators?
Oh, certainly.
The grandmother, I think, literally says at one point to the reader, to the audience, like directly addresses and said, "Don't trust the thing she says to you." And I think I forgot that as I was reading it, because it's very easy to get drawn in, I think, to this and hearing their stories and hearing them directly talk to you. And then remind yourself, well, is everything that I got told actually correct? So yet another reason why I think, multiple readings work well with this. And multiple perspectives, as we said before.
We really shouldn't trust everything that we read. So much of this story can be just chalked up to perception. How does the character view what they are experiencing? How do they explain events that have already happened? Right? This whole story could be distorted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, that kind of makes sense, right? It would be an experience where, like, trying to explain your trauma after the fact, well, how human memory is pretty terrible to begin with. And so that would certainly be the kind of thing where certain elements of distortion are going to feed in. And of course, since we didn't witness the events and we don't have newspapers follow through, we have no baseline. It's kind of fun in that regard, because we can sort of take their word for it if we want, but we'd be perfectly justified to not.
Right. So going back to the angels, what the hell is up with these insectoid angels?
Well, have you never seen a real angel?
Any of that out? I have not. No.
Okay. So real angels are nightmare
even
creatures.
If they are gray aliens. I have not seen those either.
So, according to, I don't know how to get this to you, Daniel. It's in the Twitch chat. According to the internet, real accurate,
which is biblically
the one accurate angels are horrifying monstrosities. There are some gifs somewhere. Let me see.
Well, I mean, there's like the the cherubim and like their actual descriptions of what they look like in the Bible, they're like many wings, many eyes, like Madeline L. Engel described. But they're not like giant insects.
I mean, it's kind of like an insect. Look at this thing. It's horrifying. Look at it move. It's moving, Daniel. I mean, it's a reinterpretation. Obviously, it's not like literal.
Well, no, I don't know why they're in the novel. I had a hard time coming up with a reason why they're here in this story. The saints, I get, that kind of fit in with things. Even the bird that like flies away with the saint's image could be symbolically read. But those angels, like they're brought up at the beginning and you think they're going to be a big part of things, but they aren't really.
Well, I will just tell you this, Daniel. I had to Google it because I thought maybe there was a connection. But did you know that the insect order Zoroptera contains small and soft-bodied insects with winged or unwinged forms? And they are referred to as angel insects. And among their creatures include, let me see, what's in here? What's in here?
The woodworm parasite?
I don't know if it's in here, actually. Well, give me some names. Something called a Dominican amber. I don't even know what that means. Insects are, this is weird. I don't know. I'm trying to find out. Look, they're called angel insects, and I thought they included termites, but now I don't know.
Woodworm is a species of beetle.
Yeah.
That goes in and rots the wood and such. Ambrosia beetles. But the angel insects aren't beetles, are they?
I don't know what they are, man. I don't know a damn thing about these things. They're
not an
They're ancient.
I'm not an entomologist.
I literally don't know. I don't know if there's any connection there at all.
No, Zoroptera looks very different.
Then okay, I got nothing. I don't know why the insects are angels, Daniel. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Someone will have to explain. Where's
Somebody
Karturo
else needs to read this now and try to figure it out.
I realize Karturo actually probably can't tell us because Karturo comes from a different cultural context and would not necessarily know. Like, is this specifically a Spanish nation thing, or are they just having fun?
Speaking of Spanish, random fact that I found when I was reading about this novel. Okay. The original Spanish title of the novel is Carcoma, which is apparently a colloquial term for anxiety. So
it
as
is
opposed
also
to
the
woodworm,
name for
it's anxiety.
It's also the name of a whitish, soft-bodied, ant-like social insect that feeds on wood.
Oh, there you go.
Carcoma so is also the woodworm.
Wow. Okay. So it does both.
I guess. I didn't know that was the case. So weird. I guess that's the name. That's another word for that. So.
Because I mean, I guess that idea of woodworm and rotting and gnawing at you kind of.
Yeah.
It gets at that anxiety idea.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's something there. And then on the Spanish version, I should note the creature, the insect shown on the cover is actually a praying mantis.
Yes, correct. And there's also a lobster or a crayfish, I guess.
What?
That I don't remember that being in the novel. So I don't know what the source of that is. Yeah, there's a.
Oh no. So okay, no, that's the U.S. version. In the original Spanish edition,
the Spanish version,
it has a praying mantis on top of the house.
Praying mantis. The praying mantis is here.
There's some sort of crawfish or something.
Yeah, and there's the bird with the saint.
I don't know. Man, I don't know. There's probably something here for like a bug fan, like to like tease all this out. I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting that the cover includes the praying mantis, given that prayers are part of the narrative and they're called praying mantises for obvious reasons. But I don't know that we would associate a praying mantis with angels. Or would we? I don't know, man. I don't sit around and think about this. This is slightly bizarre now that I think about it. All I know is praying mantises are mean.
I haven't heard of angels praying ever either.
I get it, Configuration Queen. Praying mantises. I got it. In chat, I see that. But I just want to say, does that make a mantis an angel?
No.
No. And you know I know that? Because they're mean. They bite. They fly at your face and stuff.
But the female bites the man's head off, right? After
yeah, supposedly.
Copulation, so I mean, you kind of have that idea, I guess.
Or do they do it, like, in order to stimulate him into being ready?
It's the nuptial gift for energy. No, biologically, that's what it's called. That practice is called a nuptial gift. Yeah.
No, that's not the name we give it.
Yes, in ecology, the name is a nuptial gift. It's giving, when the male, in terms of sexual selection and evolution, the male gives something to the female that's going to boost her ability to have successful offspring.
Yeah,
but the ultimate nuptial gift is giving yourself, so that the woman eats you,
my
so
wife's
that your
not eating my
genes
head.
can continue on.
That's not going to happen.
Not even for your offspring, Shaun.
Do it for the children. You're not biting my head off. It's not happening. Wow. This is I feel really uncomfortable that in the same breath, a nuptial gift refers to, someone giving food to their pregnant significant other or whatever partner, to help them with their pregnancy. But also, you can bite my head off. That's horrifying.
Yep.
As Triffid says in chat, it's a consummation. Oh, Lord Almighty. Well, do we have any last thoughts? We had to close this out.
Yeah, we should close out. I think we said most of the things other than random tidbits. I liked it a lot, and I want to read it again.
It's a very good book. I think it's worth a read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So everybody should buy it immediately. It is from Two Lines Press. So there you go. Okay.
Or read the Spanish and tell us.
Oh yeah, also do that. I'd love to know how it translates. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Daniel. Well, it is time for us to close out the podcast. Sad.
Do we have a song and a dance?
No, we do not. So, folks, if you would like to let us know what you thought about this episode, you read the Spanish edition and you want to give us your thoughts on translation, or you want to suggest something for us to cover, a novel, for example, you want to suggest a Mining the Genre Asteroid book that we should cover, because we got a new one of those episodes coming up in a few weeks, or anything at all that you desperately want us to cover, please go to skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions or skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. That's how you can let us know. We'd love to get comments from you. We might even read them on the internet, unless they're mean, and then we're not going to read them, because positivity into the world and all that good stuff. Please follow the show on all of our socials. We're Skiffy and Fanty basically everywhere under the sun. We're most commonly found on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, basically. We also have a newsletter, which is run by Stephen Geigen Miller, and some other stuff. So if you want to find all those links to things, go to our link tree, linktr.ee/skiffyandfanty. And then if you, again, love the show, please go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. Give us some love. Even just $1 is a lot. It helps us. And then please put reviews on iTunes and other podcatching platforms, because reviews help people find out about the show, and tell your friends to listen to us or else. For me, I am here where we also do a Skiffy and Fanty every Friday at 6:30 p.m. Central. I'm here on Alphabet Streams on Twitch. I'm on Tuesdays, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. So just keep that in mind. I have a Patreon, and I'm also on pretty much all the same social places. And you can find that on my link tree, which is just /Shaun Duke.
You can find me at Reading 1000 Lives at Blue Sky and reading1000lives.com and plenty of other review outlets. The 1000 are the numerals, not spelled out.
Numbers. Put them numbers in there. All right, as required by the Skiffy Fanny bylaws, I must now make it awkward. And so, Daniel...
May the microbes be with you.
Whoa, I'm not done yet.
Did I jump the gun? Okay.
You jumped the gun. What are you doing? Well, it's okay. You have a condition
I'm excited
right now.
to spread those microbes.
Oh, that sounds kind of dirty. Daniel, jeez. No, Daniel, during this entire episode, I've actually been building a house inside you. And I'm going to live there.
And is it filled with termites?
No. It is filled with genetically modified praying mantises who will slowly cannibalize your organs for use to heat and cool the home inside your abdomen.
All right. It's probably the microbes in the mantis that do that, but...
Yeah, they help. Yeah. So
it's a collective effort.
Yeah, so I just need to know move-in date.
We're all set to go right now.
Okay, I'll be over next week.
Yeah,
on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll just I'll just climb right in your abdomen, and we'll go from there.
I don't need to consume them, or
no. They're already there.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, thank you for your service.
All right, we've got the awkward.
On that note, awkward ending and scene.